Dad's side of the family treated me like a nobody because my mom was just his mistress, while my half-brother was treated like the apple of their eyes because he was born from a legitimate marriage and will be the rightful heir of everything he owns. Now they're scrambling because I was the only one my dad left everything to and revealed the shocking reason behind it. I always knew where I stood in my father's family, somewhere between the houseplants and the help, present but not acknowledged, existing but never quite allowed to belong. My mother used to tell me not to let it bother me, but it's hard to ignore when you're consistently treated like nothing in the family that never missed a chance to remind you where you came from. To them, I was the product of an affair, a living, breathing reminder that their golden boy, my father, had stepped out of his perfect marriage. His wife, whom everyone adored and practically treated like a queen, had already given him a son, Alex. That made her the real wife and Alex the legitimate child. Me? I was just the side project. Every Christmas, I watched Alex unwrap box after box of gifts from our uncles, aunts, and even family friends. I usually got a polite card, sometimes with a gift card inside if someone remembered. The adults would pat Alex on the back and say how proud they were of the future CEO, the rightful heir, the spitting image of his father. I was mostly invisible unless someone needed a hand in the kitchen or someone to take the group photos. Once, when I was about 8, Alex had a birthday party at our father's estate, a huge one, catered, with a magician, a bouncy castle, and personalized cupcakes. I was there too, sitting off to the side near the kitchen with the staff. My dad told me it was complicated to explain to everyone why I was there, so it was best if I kept a low profile. I remember he gave me a small silver bracelet and said he'd try to make it up to me next time. He never did. It wasn't that my dad didn't care, at least, I don't think so. He used to visit us, me and my mom, in the city every few weeks. He paid for my school, bought groceries for our apartment, and made sure we had what we needed. But it always felt like a secret arrangement. He wouldn't walk in holding my hand, he'd never post a photo of us, or talk about me at family gatherings. I wasn't even allowed to call him dad when we were outside. He said it was just to avoid drama, that he wanted to protect me from unnecessary judgment. But when you're a kid, it doesn't feel like protection, it feels like rejection. My mother bore the brunt of it. She was constantly judged, whispered about, and blamed for ruining a marriage she never intended to destroy. She told me she didn't want to fight for a spot in a place that never wanted us. I asked her once why she never married anyone else, why she stayed tied to a man who could barely acknowledge us when it mattered. She just said that some mistakes come with consequences you have to carry, and I was never one of them. Still, I tried to fit in. I'd show up to birthdays and holidays when invited, dress nicely, carrying a neutral smile, always careful not to step out of line. One year, I even bought Alex a birthday present with my savings, a leather notebook I thought he'd like. He barely looked at it before tossing it aside. His mother saw me hand it to him and muttered something under her breath, loud enough for me to hear, something about me trying too hard for a family that didn't belong to me. By the time I turned 16, I had stopped going to the estate. I told my dad I had school or part-time work. The truth was, I just couldn't stomach the pitying looks or the side-eye glances anymore. My dad would still come to see me sometimes, taking me out to lunch or helping with college forms, but even that started to taper off as I got older. I think he knew the distance was growing, but he didn't know how to stop it. When I got into college, it was a small scholarship and a loan. My father offered to cover the rest, and I let him. I guess part of me still wanted him to feel like a dad. But when I graduated, there was no celebration from his side of the family, no family dinner, no proud father speech, just a congratulatory card signed from all of us, with no names inside. I didn't even know if they knew who they were congratulating. Meanwhile, Alex was flourishing, or at least that's what everyone thought. He had dropped out of college but was still working with my father in his company, learning from the inside. They called him the heir to the throne. My name, of course, was never attached to anything. I kept moving forward. I got a job in another city and started saving. I called my dad on birthdays. I kept it cordial but distant. I had accepted by then that I would never be part of that world, not really. And that was until I got the phone call. It was early morning, and I was getting ready for work when an unknown number appeared on my screen. I ignored it at first, but they left a voicemail. It was my father's lawyer. He said I needed to come in urgently. My father had passed away the night before. I sat on the edge of my bed, phone still in my hand, and felt nothing, just empty. Not sadness, not relief, just a hollow pause in my chest. The lawyer insisted it was important. He said there were things my father had arranged that concerned me directly. I assumed it was something small, maybe a letter, maybe a piece of jewelry. I hadn't expected much, certainly not anything significant. After all, I was just the invisible daughter, the one he politely ignored, the one they never saw coming. But that meeting, it would change everything I thought I knew about where I stood in my father's life and his family. Update 1. I showed up at the lawyer's office 2 days after the call, still unsure why I was even summoned. The weather was miserable, gray skies, steady drizzle, that matched my mood. I hadn't gone to the funeral, I wasn't invited. No one called, no one fought to ask if I was coming, and I didn't ask either. I just assumed I wasn't welcome, like always. Also, I didn't know where it was being held. The office was uptown, tucked inside one of those older brick buildings with dark wood interiors and bookshelves stacked with dusty legal volumes no one ever touched anymore. The lawyer, Mr. Bernstein, looked like he'd been doing this since the 1980s, all gray hair and serious expressions. He offered condolences, but I could tell he wasn't the emotional type. He shuffled through a stack of papers and told me we'd begin once the other parties arrived. Other parties? Right. Not even 15 minutes later, in came the rest of them, my father's widow, Elaine, flawless makeup, a black designer coat, and a face so stiff with Botox she could barely frown. Beside her was Alex, sunglasses on indoors like he was protecting his celebrity status, followed by two uncles and a cousin or two. They looked at me like I'd wandered into the wrong room. Elaine immediately asked what I was doing there. Mr. Bernstein calmly said I had been named in the will and had every right to be present. Her eyebrows twitched. Alex just smirked and leaned back like this was going to be. 8-1. My dad's side of the family treated me like a nobody because my mom was just his mistress while my half-brother was treated like the apple of their eyes because he was born from a legitimate marriage and will be the rightful heir of everything he owns. Now they're scrambling because I was the only one my dad left everything to and revealed this shocking reason behind it. He read the usual formalities about debts and charitable donations, then came the part that flipped the room upside down. To my daughter, the only child who ever saw me as a man instead of a paycheck, I leave the entirety of my estate. This includes my shares in the company, my home, my private accounts, and all remaining personal assets. The silence was so loud I could hear the second hand on the wall clock ticking. Elaine was the first to break it. She said, "That must have been a mistake." She demanded to know if there had been a second, well, a newer one that made sense. Mr. Bernstein calmly said this was the most recent legally binding version, signed and notarized only 2 months prior. He even held it up for them to see. Alex stood up like he was ready to fight someone. He asked what kind of joke this was. He said I wasn't even really family. He said I was a mistake and that I didn't deserve any of it. My hand stayed folded in my lap, but my nails were digging into my palms. I didn't flinch. Then Elaine asked the big question, why? Why would my father, who practically raised Alex as his golden child, do this? Mr. Bernstein looked at me and then reached for a sealed envelope from the file. He said my father had written a personal letter to be read aloud in the event of his death. I hadn't known about that. My stomach turned. The letter was short, handwritten. It started with a few lines about regret, about how he had made choices in his life to protect his image, to preserve a false sense of family, to avoid conflict. He wrote that while he loved all of us, only one of them had ever seen him fully and accepted him anyway. He talked about me, how I never asked him for anything more than time, how I had forgiven him again and again even when he failed me, how I showed him what loyalty looked like, not through words but through quiet understanding. He admitted he had failed me, that he had allowed his family to treat me like a shadow, that he never stood up for me the way he should have, and that it ate away at him year after year. Then came the most shocking part. He wrote that Alex had stolen from him substantial amounts of money, that Elaine had known and helped cover it up to avoid embarrassment, that this wasn't a rumor, it was backed by evidence, which he had given to Mr. Bernstein to share with the board of his company if anyone contested the will. You could hear a pin drop after that. Alex's face was red with rage. Elaine looked like she had been punched. She kept insisting that my father must have been manipulated or unwell when he wrote that. But Mr. Bernstein calmly stated that my father had taken every legal and medical precaution to confirm he was of sound mind when finalizing the will. I didn't say a word. I couldn't. My body was frozen. I had come expecting a simple formality, maybe a gesture of closure. I never expected to be handed everything they thought would be theirs. I never expected the man who always kept me in the shadows to finally pull me into the light. When the meeting was over, Elaine stormed out first. Alex followed, still shouting about how this wasn't over and how I'd regret it. I didn't respond. My mind was still stuck on the phrase from the letter. The only child who ever saw me as a man. I stayed a little longer to ask Mr. Bernstein what this meant for the company, for the estate, for the fallout I was now about to walk into. He said it meant a lot of paperwork, a lot of decisions, and possibly a lot of unwanted attention. But he said I had every legal right to everything that had been given to me. I walked out of that office not with triumph but with a quiet, stunned heaviness. For so long, I had been ignored, dismissed, and shoved aside, and now, suddenly, I held the keys to a kingdom I was never meant to enter. But this wasn't about revenge. At least, not for me. Update 2. News travels fast when there's money involved. By the next morning, I'd already received a series of emails from the company board requesting a meeting with me as the new primary shareholder. Apparently, my father hadn't just handed me a bank account and a few properties. He had left me controlling interest in the very company my half-brother used to brag he'd take over one day. I didn't even know how to feel. I hadn't planned for any of this. I worked a regular office job, paid my rent on time, and lived a quiet life. But now, just like that, I was sitting on top of assets and responsibilities worth millions. And then came the texts. One from my cousin, a half-hearted attempt to check in and see how I was holding up. Another from an aunt who hadn't spoken to me in years, saying we should catch up soon. I deleted them without replying. But the one that stopped me in my tracks was from Alex. He said we needed to talk, that there had to be a misunderstanding, that Dad must have written the will in a moment of confusion, and that I knew deep down it was meant for him. He even had the nerve to ask if I could at least share the inheritance since he had always been like a brother to me. I didn't respond. What was there to say? Instead, I called Mr. Bernstein and asked for help arranging security for my father's estate. I had a bad feeling that something was coming, and I was right. That weekend, I went back to my father's house for the first time in years. It still didn't feel like mine. Everything was pristine and cold, just like Elaine had always kept it. No family photos of me, just elegant decorations, spotless surfaces, and portraits of Alex from every stage of his life. I wasn't there to redecorate or make changes. I just needed time to process. But I wasn't alone for long. Elaine showed up unannounced. She let herself in using her old key, something I made a note to change immediately, and walked through the front door like she still owned the place. She didn't even look at me. She just said she was there to collect a few personal things. I reminded her that everything in the house now legally belonged to me and that she needed to make a list and go through proper channels. She laughed like I was being dramatic. Then she said something that made my skin crawl. "You don't belong here. You're nothing but a walking reminder of your mother's shame." I had heard variations of that sentiment my whole life, but this time was different. This time, she was standing in the foyer, talking down to me like she still had the upper hand. I told her the visit was over and that she needed to leave. She tried to argue, said she'd call the police if I laid a finger on her. I told her to go ahead. I'd love for the authorities to show up and hear about how she tried to steal from a house she no longer had any claim to. That shut her up. She grabbed her bag and stormed out, heels clicking like gunshots on the marble floor. That night, I walked through the house alone, room by room, trying to make sense of it all. I found an old box tucked behind some files in my father's study. Inside were photographs of me and him from when I was younger, photos I'd never seen before, me sitting on his shoulders at the zoo, us laughing over ice cream, a few birthday cards I had written him, the handwriting painfully childish. There was a small note inside too.